Forces and resources. In following the line that leads to equal rights, we are advancing to a fight, not beating a retreat. We should take careful account of our forces and resources. Our numerical strength. Our numerical strength is at once a force and a resource. Not only the apathy, prejudice, and opposition in the United States will be able to block the forward march of 12 million people if they were formed into intelligent, courageous, and persistent phalanx. 12 million of us can be a reservoir from which may be drawn almost all the elements needed in our struggle. Before our numerical strength was as great as it is, we had already drawn from the reservoir certain elements and made them into active forces. We must now make those forces more effective, organized, and perfect still other forces, and bring about a coordination of all of them for the achievement of our objective. Up to now, we have shown no greater weakness than our inability or unwillingness to coordinate the forces that we have long had at hand. Aside from the handicapping effects of ignorance and inexperience, we have allowed pettiness and jealousies, rivalries, and downright meanness to interfere with and defeat worthy attempts to cooperation. By this time, we ought to have learned a lesson. The Negro Church. The Negro Church is the most powerful and potentially the most effective medium we possess. The whole Christian church stands at this period in need of another reformation, a sloughing off of outworn creeds and dogmas, and an application of its power to the working out of the present-day problems of civilization and of social and spiritual life. The Negro Church stands in need of some special reforms. First of all, the church, together with the race as a whole, must do a certain amount of clearing away in the religious field. We must stamp out as far as we can the bootleggers of religion, those parasites who, whenever they can get together a sufficient number of poor, hard-working women, will open a storefront or basement church and peddle a spurious brand of Christianity at a relative exorbitant price. Some of these men may be sincere, but the majority of them are ignorant, lazy louts who would be of greater value to themselves and to the race if they were put at manual labor. A more important task is the driving out of those lecherous criminal scoundrels who, as spectacular figures, are a rather recent product. These self-anointed bishops, messiahs, and what-nots, whose central idea of a church is a holy harem, a sanctified system of concubinage, arouse only feelings of disgust and rage. They all belong in jail, and each of us who helps to land one there does a good service. No one, no matter what may be this attitude on religion, can fail to be interested in the astonishing history of the Negro Church, if he will only become acquainted with it. And once he is familiar with that history, he will be compelled to acknowledge the vital work the church has accomplished. Aside from it has done in religion, education, and in charities, it has been a tremendous social force. When there was no other agency to do it, the church brought about cohesion, stabilization in a bewildered and leaderless mass. But the church cannot sit back on the essential work it accomplished in slavery days and in the post-Civil War period. It cannot excuse existing shortcomings by pointing to its worthy record. It must thoroughly make the internal reforms that will better fit it to meet the responsibility for racial achievement that it should shoulder now. The church must as nearly as it can abolish hypnotic religion, that religion which excites visions of the delights of life in the world to come. While it gives us no insight into the conditions we encounter in the world in which we now live, there is still to be found in the Negro Church too much obsolete doctrine. In too many pulpits there are still to be heard terrific fulminations against dancing, theater-going, and card-playing from preachers who ignore or know nothing about the fundamental current questions of life. These stricter, of course, may also be applied to many white churches. The church is devoting too much energy to raising money to meet mortgage payments on fine edifices, the denominational rivalries and competition in our show that have forced the church into the position of living above its means and of being left with no financial margin after the high cost of worshiping God in a sumptuous temple is met. Such conduct is a such conduct is as reprehensible in a congregation that it is an individual. As to mere church buildings, the most affluent Negro congregation in the country requires no more and is warranted in having no more than a modest, inadequate meeting house, beautiful because of its simplicity. When we think of the number of congregations made up of people just this side of the poverty line struggling to possess and maintain a building entirely beyond their needs and their means, we find it both magic and absurd. This common extravagance leaves mighty few Negro congregations with anything like the margin of money they should have on hand to be devoted to applied Christianity. Needless multiplication of congregations is a definite weakness in the church. It is a process by which its strength, resources, and effectiveness are dissipated. I was recently in North City of 75,000 inhabitants. The Negro population is about 1,000. As in all similar situations, these colored people were disoriented and in an anomalous position. They were too numerous to go unnoticed into general community life and not numerous enough to constitute a group unto themselves. Yet these 1,000 Negroes have 5 churches with a total membership of 204. One church is all they need, all they can support. One church might be made into an agency that would improve their industrial, social, and civic status as well as their spiritual state. 5 churches do not multiply, they nullify whatever strength and effectiveness the one church might have. Denominational and individual rivalries make this question a difficult one. Most denominations have a degree of authority in the matter, and others very little or none. Possibly all the denominations might sign a concordat and agree upon a maximum number of congregations for each of so many hundred or thousands of Negro inhabitants in a given area, then proceed to carry out a policy of consolidation and, when necessary, abolishment. By such a process, each denomination will find itself the gainer in strength and resources. In almost every community, the Catholic Church serves as a grand example of the conservation of power, an example we might well imitate. The Negro Church, notwithstanding, is the most powerful agency we command for moving forward the race as a mass. It is then not too much to call upon the Church to meet the exigency as it met the situation confronting it in slavery days and in the post-Civil War period. The present task requires an intelligent, high-minded, upright ministry, and that kind of ministry the church must have. The ignorant preacher of the past performed the week that was before him as best he could. All honor to him for what he accomplished, but the day of the ignorant preacher is gone. With the making of these needed internal reforms, the church will again demand of Negro youth in our colleges and universities a consideration of the ministry as a career giving scope for the exercise of their highest and best powers. Thereby, the church will be made a field as attractive for well-educated and progressive youth as the field of medicine, law, dentistry, and social work have become in recent years. In the meantime, earnest, forward-looking, spiritual-minded young men and women in our colleges should not stand aside waiting for these reforms to be completed. They should go into the church and help to bring them about. What would it not mean to have a Negro ministry working for the advancement of race with the same degree of intelligence, zeal, and singleness of purpose with which the Catholic clergy works for the advancement of those who profess the Catholic faith? The Negro Press. The Negro Press was 30 years ago a feeble and struggling medium. 30 years ago, many colored people who deemed themselves intelligent openly boasted that they never read Negro newspapers. The papers themselves did not offer much. They were in the main poorly written, ritually printed, and run as personal organs. Today, the Negro press is powerful and, relatively speaking, rich. The leading periodicals are printed on high-speed web perfecting presses. They carry all the modern newspaper features and are intelligently edited. The Negro Press as a racial agency is today second only to the Negro Church in the number of people reached and influenced. It is needless to say that this new power entails new responsibilities. There is no doubt that Negro journalists with a social sense recognize that fact. It is possible that they are wrestling with the problem of directing the power of the machine that has been created into channels of high purpose, a problem that is not simple or easy. Many of the Negro newspapers have become popular and popular periodical as an insatiable creature. It must continually be fed on circulation secured at almost any price. So the management of a popular periodical is constantly driven by the necessity of furnishing what it thinks the greatest number of people want. Once on that road, it must keep up an accelerating speed. It cannot turn back. It cannot stop. It cannot even slow down. Give people what they want is a spacious slogan. It implies that the people are continually demanding other and still other things that the press must supply, and that what the people want is consequently good. Of these two implications, neither is true. The facts are popular periodical exhaust ingenuity in supplying things which they hope the people will want, and what the people want is often bad or without value. It is the business of a newspaper to give the news is another specious slogan. Editors should regard themselves as intelligent and responsible members of society. Certainly one of their responsibilities is to judge whether or not the news they disseminate serves any good purpose whatever, and whether or not it is worth at least the paper on which it is printed. And any person of average intelligence is forced to say that an undue proportion of the news in American newspapers, from the biggest dailies to the weakest weeklies, is not worth that much. I believe I am right when I say that the Negro press has a peculiar as well as a general relationship to its clientele, that the Negro editor has a relatively deeper responsibility to his public than the white editor has to his. That the service possible for the Negro press to render to Negro Americans is more vital than what the white press has to give to white America. I believe that Negro Americans will understand and accept this statement without discussion. It then follows that Negro newspapers ought to be more than imitations of white newspapers. Without doubt, they should avoid copying the license of the sensational daily newspapers that appeal to morons and the morbid-minded. Of course, we have our share of morons, and they constitute a tempting field for greater circulation, but why not try to gratify their wants in some better way? Our newspapers should also avoid following the example of those white publications that make a feature of pornography. An examination of the vast number of salacious white periodicals published in the United States will incline one to think that sex has gone to the white man's head, transferred its seat to the imagination. When sex goes to the head, it loses its lusty and wholesome quality and begins to fester, to become maggoty. Sex with us is in a large measure still in the lusty, wholesome stage. Let's keep it there as long as we possibly can. I do not see how the Negro press can escape the responsibility of facing the question of the net results, of the ultimate effect of its work on the race, especially on the younger generation. Is it to be satisfied with only the fortuitous benefits that may come from commercially successful journalism, or is it to feel that commercial success gives it the resources and facilities for carrying out a definite and far-reaching plan? Is it through its news policy to run the risk of making itself an unconscious agent or defeatism, or does it desire to place the stronger emphasis on the notes of courage and confidence and final victory? I am not an impractical visionary. I have been a newspaper man. I know that in order for Negro newspapers to accomplish much good, they must first be good newspapers. I feel, however, that they can be good newspapers and at the same time something beyond merely good newspapers. The pre-Civil War Negro newspapers did a great work. They dedicated themselves to the anti-slavery cause and had a large share in arousing and shaping public opinion. They quickened and inspired their readers and gave them a voice that made itself heard. They played a significant part in creating the forces that led to the destruction of slavery. With this main object accomplished, they passed off the scene. Contemporary Negro newspapers have done a revolutionary thing. They have converted masses of Negro Americans into readers. Hundreds of thousands who formerly read nothing today read the Negro periodicals, and no Negro would today boast that he never reads a Negro newspaper, because they have taught masses of Negro Americans to read. They have been able in the extraordinary degree to keep the race aware and awake. They have likewise had marked effect upon the consciousness of white America. In a number of crises, their work has been invaluable. When the dire anti-lynching bill was being pushed, the Negro newspapers were a greater factor in keeping the whole race stirred up and determined on the issue, and copies that reached the desks of the congressmen and senators gave those representatives of the people a new light on their fellow Americans. This was a clear instance for the power possible for them to wield. The Negro press has prepared a rich field. What the harvest is to be is a question that owners and editors should seriously consider. Organizations. Organizations among us are without number. There is a popular idea that we do not organize. It is erroneous. The fact is we tend to over-organize. If all the Negro organizations in the United States marched in procession, they would be a month or more passing any given point. Most of them, however, are small, separate bodies, and their main purposes are decidedly minor. What we lack is the will and ability to organize for major purposes. Our principal fraternal organizations are national in scope. They developed rapidly and reached a degree of power and prosperity which now appears to be on the wane. Our big fraternities have filled and are still filling a useful purpose, but the difference between them and the smaller organizations is mainly a difference in size and resources. Their functions and objectives are fundamentally the same. All of these organizations function as units for social intercourse and enjoyment. They provide a forum for large politics and arenas in which self-realization and preferment may be achieved. They also have an economic future. They care for the sick and bury the dead. In many of them, however, burying the dead has called for financial outlay so far out of proportion to that used in caring for the living as to make the high cost of dying a live question. One of the big organizations established an educational fund, but speaking generally, great resources, numerical, social, and financial of our powerful fraternal organizations have been utilized with hardly a thought given to the fundamental phases of the situation in which Negroes in the United States find themselves. Many thousands of dollars have been wasted on annual conventions of which the chief business was having a good time, on showy parades, and on ostentatious funerals. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been put into ornate temples, and in many cases, these temples have led to bankruptcy and mortgage foreclosures. Other hundreds of thousands of dollars have become bones of contention and led to dissension and lawsuits. In too many instances, the heading up of a fraternal organization has been developed into a lucrative business. In plain words, into a racket. Our fraternal organizations have in a number of ways done much good, but considering their strength and their peculiar opportunities as secret societies for doing vital services, they have, in the larger racial affairs, fallen short. They have failed. The two chief organizations that devote their efforts and resources primarily to the questions which affect Negroes as citizens of this country are both interracial. They are the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the National Urban League. There is between these two organizations an understanding which makes for a rough division of the work into two fields, economic and civil. The Urban League has given its efforts to housing, health, and employment. The National Association has given its efforts to civil, legal, and constitutional rights. There has, of course, have been some overlapping. The rights of the Negro in industry naturally involve his rights as a citizen. Taking into account all their shortcomings and all the mistakes and failures they may have made, the overwhelming fact remains that both these organizations have done excellent and essential work, and neither of them has been given the support it has deserved. There are also the Southern Commission on Interracial Cooperation, which has accomplished certain delicate and important things that could not have been accomplished through any other medium, and the Interracial Commission of the Federal Council of the Churches of Christ in America, which has been a strong factor among religious bodies. The correlation of all forces, a superpower. Now these principal forces and resources that have enumerated are far from negligible. Even at their weakest, they are assets. Their actual strength is great. Their potential powers have not been estimated. It is the potential powers of these elements that I shall discuss at this point. They are the powers above and beyond those needed and employed in the normal functioning of these elements, and they are the powers before which the obstacles between us and our major goal would be compelled to yield. How may we call these potential powers, these powers that will prove effective into being? The simplicity of the process will probably throw doubt on the magnitude of the feat. It may be done through complete correlation of the existing forces. The result will be not merely increased efficiency in all the various units and greater total strength, it will be the creation of an entirely new power, a superpower. A power will be a fusion of all our energies. If we create this power and center its force upon the walls that stand between us and the common rights, guarantees, and privileges of citizenship, we can be confident of battering them down. The practical method I suggest for the creation and utilization of this power is to channel all our forces so they will be functioning through a central machine. I believe we have that machine at hand in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. I believe we could get desired results by making that organization the nucleus, the synthesis, the clearinghouse of our forces, It already has the experience, the skill, and in good part the machinery. It has proved itself both. Wow. It has it has proved itself honest, sincere, intelligent, and capable. For the purpose of achieving, maintaining, and safeguarding our citizenship rights, no other organizations can be compared with it. Its policies and technique have proved to be the most advanced and effective that we have thus far been able to devise. I know that this is not a wholly unanimous opinion. The statement I have made has been frequently put in the form of a question. I believe, however, that a study of the history and work of the association for the past 25 years and of the concurrent history of Negro Americans will furnish sufficient evidence to prove that the race has made positive gains through the efforts of the NAACP. Its successful efforts to hold segregation within the limits of custom and prevent it from being put over into the realm of laws, its leadership in the fight against lynching, and its keeping of that crime and other racial injustices before the conscience of the American people, and its half-dozen signal legal victories involving our constitutional rights are examples in point. But there's another way of evaluating the work of the organization. When the NAACP was founded, the great danger facing us was that we should lose the vestige of our rights by default. The organization checked that danger. It acted as a watchman on the wall, sounding alarms that called us to defense. Its work would be of value if only for the reason that without it our status would be worse than it is. In cities where our numbers are large, we still live grouped together in one or more Negro sections. Although here in Nashville, where I am writing, white and colored people live together rather indiscriminately in many of the sections. But there is hardly a doubt that in such cities, Negro Americans by this time will all have been sentenced by law to live in black ghettos if the NAACP had not won the Louisville segregation case, in which the Supreme Court declared residential segregation on grounds of race to be unconstitutional. I am taking it for granted that no one will be so shallow as to ask if there is any difference between segregation by social convention and segregation by legal enactment. I believe also that the National Association laid the foundation for the restoration of the ballot to Negro Americans in the South through its victories in the Texas primary case. The Negro lost the right to vote conferred on him by the 14th and 15th Amendment because the Supreme Court, through hair-splitting sophistry and astute evasion, emasculated both amendments to the point of nullification. The signs are now that the right to vote will be re-established to the decisions of the same court. There is a school that holds these legal victories are empty. They are not. At the very least, they provide the ground upon which we may make stand for our rights. In the North, we have a fair decree of civil rights, and in the South, we have the right to battle for those rights because the 14th and 15th Amendment are in the Constitution. Let us suppose them not there, and we reach a quick realization of the material importance of legal enactments, or note the effect of adverse laws. If we correlate our numerical strength, the strength of our religions and fraternal organizations, such political and economic power as we have, and the power of our press in a way to make the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People the spearhead of our forces in a way that will enable it to shift the emphasis more and more from protest to action and more fully to translate declarations into deeds and to wind its field to include all the fundamental phases of life that affect us as citizens. There are Negro Americans now born who will live to see the race according to the common rights of citizenship on the same terms upon which they are accorded to the other groups in the nation. The suggestion I make of the NAACP as the central machine has, and I hope it is not necessary for me to state this, no relation to the fact that for a number of years I was a member of the executive staff of the association and still officially connected with the organization. I make it on what appear to me to be the undeniable fact of the situation. If plans for a more adequate and more effective central machine are suggested, I should readily subscribe to them.